This video will be continuing chapter 11. We'll be looking at section 2 now in quadratic equations. And we're going to look about how to solve quadratic equations and in this particular video. And so an introduction to quadratic equation, or maybe a reintroduction for most of you, we're looking at an equation which the variable appears to be to the second power, but no higher. So we're looking at something to the second power, but no higher. So you're not going to see x to the third, x to the fourth, any exponents like that. And so every quadratic equation can be put into a standard quadratic form, which is going to have an x term, an x squared term, an x term, and then you're going to have a constant. And so every quadratic equation must have an x squared term, but the x term or the constant may be missing. So looking at this first example, 2x squared plus x minus 5 equals 0. It is a quadratic equation. It's in the standard form, and this is the way that you'll see it most of the time. Now, x squared plus 4 equals 0 is also a quadratic equation. You'll notice it has the x squared component to it, but it does not have the second x term. The x term is missing, but everything else is there and it's in the proper order. And you could say, if you wanted to, x squared plus 0x, because 0 times x is 0, plus 4 is the same thing, but you don't want to. You just want to keep it with the simple x squared plus 4, because that's going to make it easier when we go to solve that later on. And then, so also, another example, here's different ways to be able to write quadratic equations. And so you can see that you just move around the x squared terms and the x terms and the constants to be able to get everything to where it equals 0. So that's going to be important, because that's how we're going to show and demonstrate that a quadratic equation is actually an equation, and that the numbers that go in are equal. And so we will look at this, and so you can take x squared equals 25x, and what you'll do is you'll just move the 25x over so that it is negative 25x equals 0. Same thing here, except for you're just going to move your negative 3x squared up in front of 8x, and then also down here, here's a good point actually. When you do that, this negative 3x squared in front, you can take and multiply the whole thing by negative 1 so that you get a positive 3x squared. And you're going to want to do that because you're going to want to take the square root of this later on possibly, and you want that to be a positive number. And in here, for this one also, 4x squared minus 5x equals 6. You just move the 6 over and it puts it in standard form. With the quadratic equation, just to show exactly what that means for having solutions, and that it can have more than one solution. And so you will have, in this case, this quadratic equation has solutions where x equals 2, or x can equal 3. And to see that that is actually the case, you can just plug 2 into the equation. And so I won't worry about going through and doing the math with you. You can see that when you plug 2 in here and square it and multiply 2 times negative 5, then it ends up being negative 6 plus 6, which is 0 equals 0. And the same thing here for when you plug 3 into it. Now, one of the things that you can do is, and it's the easiest kind of quadratic equation it really is, if you are missing the x term and you have a exponent, and you have a number that is squared on one side, you put the constant on the other side and you go ahead and solve it. And so in this case, this quadratic equation, x squared minus 25 equals 0, if you just go ahead and move the 25 to the other side, you have x squared equals 25. So then, to be able to solve this, you want to solve it for x. And so you just take the square root of both sides, and you end up with x equals 5 or -5. Another way to be able to write this is the positive or negative of 25, because remember, if you have 5 times 5, that's 25, and -5 times -5 is 25. And so in this case, x equals 5 or -5. Make sure that you always solve for the positive and the negative. And so this is just reinforcing what I just said. Make sure that you realize that when you do that, you also recognize that if you go to square this side, you can't square a negative number, because there isn't a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative squared that will give you a negative number. So it has no solution. All right, that's the end of this video.